everyone on the live stream. Thank you for showing up today. Is there a problem? Okay, you good? Okay. All right. So me again. So we had a mix-up in the schedule, and the mix-up was we were gonna just we thought Dennis was gonna just come on trumpets, but he's here today. So he's going to do the sermon. I was going to do the study, and Johans was going to do the sermon if that was the case. But since I had already prepared for the study, Johans has allowed me to just go ahead and do the study, and Dennis will do the sermon. So we will figure out this schedule probably by the time feast is over with. We'll get back on track and back in line. So you guys get me today. And in getting me, I will warn you, and I apologize, I have a lot of information. And so once I started working on the second half of Matthew 14, so we're going to start Matthew 14:13, if you'll turn there. Matthew 14, verse 13. Once I started working on this, it was just so much to unpack. I hope that I get through it all, but again, it's a lot of information, and I apologize ahead of time for the amount of data I'm about to dump on you guys right now. So Matthew 14:13 is actually, we're just going to go down to 14:21, and it is the story of the feeding of the 5,000, the loaves and the fishes. And so you would think, David, how can you have so much content over the feeding of the 5,000? Just hold your horses, because here we go. It's just a lot here. I did not even think about how much truly is a part of these particular passages. We know we see the movies where they illustrate what it would be like if we were actually there when Yeshua feeds the 5,000. But I think if we, from a scriptural standpoint, go through it and review it and connect the dots between what Scripture says and what happened actually on that day, then we get to sense a bigger picture of Yahweh's grand scheme and the grand scheme that he has for this world and for those that will be his. So Matthew 14:13. Let's turn there. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Matthew 14:13 says, and we're picking up here because this is right after the disciples came to him and told him that John the Baptist had died. Matthew 14:13 says, when Yahshua heard of this, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him afoot out of the cities. And so, I have questions every time I read something. And this is nothing different. So my question here is, two questions. First question is, why did Yeshua depart after hearing the news about John? Why did he depart from where he was when he heard the news of John's death? Can't answer, Dennis. It just does. It's in the commentary, so yeah. So the commentary, or Barnes notes, most commentary that you read, they have a view of why Yeshua departed, and I'll read it. Barnes notes suggests he was staying out of the sight, or the sight of the people, or the sight of anybody, to secure his life until the appointed time in which he would have to die. Basically, he knew when his time would come, so they killed John, they might come for me type of mentality, so he departed. And that's backed up by Scripture. Actually, let's go to John 2, verse 4. This is just setting the stage, giving context here. John 2, verse 4, this is when he was at the wedding and his mom said, hey, you need to help us. And his response, John 2, verse 4, Yahshua said unto her, woman, what have I to do with thee? My hour is not yet come. So this is basically saying that, hey, he was mindful of his hour was a specific time, and he didn't want to either expose himself or do anything before that time was come. And the same thing we have in John 7:6. John 7, verse 6. In John 7:6, this is when they asked him to go to Jerusalem for the feast. And here we have his response in regards to going to Jerusalem for the feast. John 7, verse 6 says, Then Yahshua said unto them, My time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil. Go ye up unto the feast. I go not up yet unto the feast, for my time is not yet full come. So, scriptures to back up. Barnes' note said that he basically wanted to make sure that he could actually fulfill what he came to do and was not disrupted, so he departed after John's death. However, could it be something more simple than that? Let's go to Mark 6, verse 31. Mark 6, verse 31. And the reason I put these particular scriptures together, because when we read commentary does give us insightful information to what the majority of people think of what scripture is trying to relate to us. But sometimes scripture can speak for itself. And when scripture speaks for itself, we should take scripture over anything other than scripture. Line upon line, precept upon precept. It is there. Scripture explains itself. And Mark 6:31, do we have a reason why Yeshua left? I think we do. Mark 6, verse 31 says, And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place, and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. And this is the actual beginning or during the time that he departed from them to a desert place. And Mark just explains that they didn't have any rest, and they wanted to go to a desert place to get rest from all of the people. Yes?
Well, we were there in 1999. One of the things over that side of the Sea of Galilee still does not really have any occupation or any structures or any towns or any buildings.
It's a
deserted area.
Deserted area. And I find it funny because, Dennis, I listen to you all the time when you say the wilderness. When they say the wilderness, it's not a desert place that we think of Mojave Desert. It's just nobody lives there.
Yeah, it's just not occupied with houses and farms and structures.
Yeah, and so that's going to come up here in a little bit. A desert place could literally just mean there's nothing there. It's wide open space with no resources, no houses, no people, none of that. But they did that to get away from the people, because if you think about it, if Yeshua is healing and teaching nonstop, a constant flow of people, and they have not had any rest or leisure, it could get overwhelming to the point you say, I got to go somewhere else just to catch a break. Let me go catch my breath. So I'm not discounting Barnes' notes and suggesting he was mindful of not being captured or being, killed, or them, finding him and doing something to him before his time. But I'm saying scripture says that he just basically left because he needed a break. In my opinion, my interpretation.
David,
so, yes.
It could be too that he sought solitude to grieve for John.
Yes, I didn't think about that. He just basically wanted to wrap his mind around his cousin's death. And so he needed to get away from the people to reflect and understand what has happened. Yes, Bob.
Just an observation. I think about this too. When I read my Bible, that many, I'll just use the word saints, in other words, those that are chosen, are destined to die, and not necessarily a pleasant death.
Right.
And so I can identify with him when I read those scriptures, when it talks about we're going to be hated by all men.
Right.
We're going to be hated. And it's hard to get your head around the fact that we're going to be hated.
Yep, and most of the time, the people that hate us, they don't know why.
You want to take a break and get away and just try to comprehend what's laying ahead of him, because he knows this from the beginning, probably from maybe even from childhood, I don't know.
Yes. The next verse is definitely going to, in my mind, open my eyes to what would be going on in the mind of Yeshua in just these two verses of what's transpired. His cousins passed. He got all of these people around him. He's teaching and healing. He needs to actually grieve over his cousin, which he hadn't had time to do, so he needs to step away. But before I get there, think about the mindset of if all of that happened to you, how would you feel and what would your reaction
Well
be?
put.
What would your reaction be? And so I had a second question on this. The second question was, when we read these passages in 14:13, Matthew, how did he depart in a ship, but the people actually followed him on foot? No, Dennis, you can't answer. No, go ahead, Dennis. Hit it. You know this one, right? It's so as it's described in commentary, when they left the Capernaum area by ship, they went south instead of across. And as they went south, the people left the city and traveled on foot on land to go exactly where he was. And so they went on boat, which was easier. The people actually walked all the way down to where he went.
It's not a short walk.
No, some people think that he went all the way down to Tiberias, which is a long way or somewhere to that effect.
Something else that Luke 9:10.
I don't have that one.
You don't have that? The apostles, when they had returned, told him what things they had done. He took them and withdrew apart to the desert region of a city called Bethsaida.
No, Bethsaida. Yeah, I missed that one. So that's is that southwest of Galilee?
Well,
Geographic.
I'm not sure on that.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll have to pull that one up.
Tiberias is to the east. South.
I think we got a map over right behind you, Dennis. It's on next to that Bible shelf. You see that piece of paper up one right there? Yeah.
No, Bethsaida is actually to the northeast. It's up next where the
Oh,
Jordan comes into the
Oh,
north
okay.
end of the Sea of Galilee.
All right. So commentary we can't rely on. So they didn't go south. They
They
went
went
north,
north and east.
and the people just basically went around
Yeah, just followed the
shoreline around northeast to get to where he was. So not south, but northeast. Sorry about that. That is why we study.
Tiberias is south.
Tiberias is south. So thinking about that, so I always wondered that, and it's not a big thing. It's like, oh, David, why are you harping on that? Well, a lot of people, when they read these things, the confusion lies, oh, if he went by ship, the people, in order to get to where he was, walked on water. No, they did not walk on water. They stayed on land and just went around, which was a greater distance than him going on a ship.
Well, in 99, we went by ship from Capernaum to Tiberias.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so I think that's probably why everybody thinks that that's where he went. But either way, they just basically followed him on foot, which was a big thing. Larry, did you have something? I saw your hand. Okay.
No, I was just turning scriptures.
Yeah.
I was looking for a map.
Oh yeah. I meant to print out some more, but
Not yours.
I thought we had more than that one copy. Yes.
Well,
Tom.
Jim, very little. If this was an auction, we gotta be careful that it was an auction, because sometimes I've been at auctions, you just make a slight gesture and say, and you bid how much?
Right. All right. So I wanted to read Mark's account of this same thing in Mark 6, verse 32 and 33. Mark, he doesn't give a perfect explanation like I just described of them walking on the shoreline when Yeshua walked on ship, but he does add additional context. And we're going to go back and forth between Matthew and Mark a lot, because Mark, I think, is the most descriptive of this account out of all the Gospels. But Mark 6, verse 32 says, "And they departed into a desert place by ship privately, and the people saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran afoot thither out of the cities, and outwent them and came together unto him. They basically followed him on foot. Now the question was, why did they follow him at such great distance on foot? Why was it, that many people so willing to follow a person that went by ship instead of just staying there and waiting for him to come back? Well, John explains that perfectly in John 6:2. John 6, verse 2. John 6, verse 2. John 6:2 says, "And a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased." So you got Yeshua's there with them doing miracles and teaching them, and then he leaves. Well, assuming that everybody that needed healing hadn't got healed, yeah, I'm going to walk miles and miles to follow him wherever he went. Yes, just to get whoever, myself or somebody that I know, healed by the Master. And so they followed him this great distance into the desert because they wanted to continually be healed by Yeshua Messiah. All right, so we got one verse down. A couple of more to go. Let's go Matthew 14:14. So Matthew 14:14, and this kind of gives me a little bit on the mindset of Yeshua as well. Matthew 14:14, he says, "And Yeshua went forth and saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion towards them, and he healed their sick." So the question I have here is, he was moved with compassion towards him. Why was Yeshua moved to compassion for them? Was it because they had walked so far to follow him on the shoreline? Or was it a different reason? Well, we got to go to Mark 6:34 to find the answer. Yeah, we're going to do a lot of skipping around. And, the fact that we're skipping around, each gospel gives a piece of the puzzle when it comes to this particular event. And so you have to take all of the accounts, piece them together, and what I've mentioned a long time ago is a forensic statement analysis. You take everybody's view. Forensic statement analysis. Yeah.
That's a pretty highfalutin term.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't create it, but it's taking everybody's account of what happened, piecing it together to get the full picture. That's what we're going to do today. And so Mark 6:34 says, "And Yahshua, when he came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion towards them, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things." And I focus on that sentence or that portion of the sentence, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. That's why he was compassionate towards them. Now, Barnes' notes states that the reason he said they were like sheep not having a shepherd is he meant that they had no teachers or guides who cared for them or instructed them. The Pharisees and Sadducees were haughty and proud and cared little for the common people, and when they did attempt to teach them, they led them astray. Therefore, the people came in great multitudes to Yeshua, which preached the gospel to the poor and healed the sick. That's Barnes' Notes commentary. Which works because you don't have to turn there. Matthew 23, we're going to get there eventually in our study. The woe to the scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourself, neither yourself for them to go in and enter as well. So we do have scripture that does dictate that he would be compassionate to them because they have no shepherds, because the Pharisees and Sadducees would lead them astray.
That's right.
Yes.
In John the 10th chapter, the sign himself, Yahshua says, a stranger will not follow the good shepherd, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. But he's very plain in saying that in verse 7 of John 10, "Then Yahshua said to them again, Truly, truly, truly is getting very emphatic. I'm saying to you that I am the door of the sheep. All in that era, apparently, he's not talking about the Hebrew prophets like in Jeremiah. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers.
We're gonna go there. I want you to stop
From the
there.
sheep and not hear them, but it just came to mind. He's verifying what you're bringing out.
I'm gonna go there, but
Oh, okay.
I didn't have 7, but I'm glad you mentioned 7 because you kind of see where I'm going. When we read commentary, commentary does spot on kind of give us the guidance of, hey, this is probably why he said this, and scripture to back it up. But is it more because of something else that's in scripture, a reason why he had compassion towards them because they were sheep not having shepherds? Let's go to Psalm 23. Dennis smiling. They know exactly where I'm going with this. Again, this is nothing new, guys. It's just that we're covering Matthew as a refresher for everybody so that we can kind of keep this in the back of our mind that this is actually what Scripture wants us to do. Psalms 23, verse 1. Psalms 23, verse 1. And everybody knows this by heart. Psalms 23, verse 1 says, Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still water. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. And I'll stop there. So taking into account what we just read from Tom, and matter of fact, we're going to go there. Wouldn't you be moved to compassion if you kind of saw Scripture being fulfilled right before your eyes? If you saw a prophecy that was being fulfilled right before your eyes, would you be moved to compassion?
Moved to compassion?
Yes, for people. For the people. Yes.
Oh, those people.
Yes, those people. As they're walking towards him, and he sees all these people that do not have a shepherd to lead them, but they're coming to him to be the shepherd, to teach them and to heal them. Would that not make you more compassionate for them? Because you see what Scripture, and this is where it gets really complicated, Yeshua, who is the Word, his Word being fulfilled.
So David, another way of how I look at it is he fed them with his word.
Yes.
He saw their hunger for the truth.
Their need for
Right.
salvation and for healing and all of that stuff.
Because he did say he began to teach them many things.
He began to teach them many things at that point. So, yes. Curtis.
Maybe a little off, but can we try Zechariah 11, pick it up in verse 4?
If you're there, go ahead. Zechariah 11, verse 4.
Thus is Yahweh Elohim. Feed the flock for slaughter. Those owners who slaughter them and feel no guilt. The owners who slaughter them and they feel no guilt. Those who sell them and say, well, blessed be Yahweh because I'm rich. And the shepherds do not pity them.
Oh,
Yep.
very good, Curtis.
For I will no longer. Okay, but that's.
Yeah. Larry, go ahead.
I was thinking about the words in James in chapter 2. It says, my Yahshua, the Master, do not have, let's see, my brethren, do not have the faith of Yahshua, the Master of glory, with respects of persons. How then, if a man comes into your synagogue wearing gold rings and dressed in splendid apparel, and there comes also a poor man in lowly apparel, and you give preference to the one who is wearing the splendid apparel, and say to him, sit yourself here in the best place, and you say to the poor man, stand over there or sit here under my footstool, then have you not passed judgment among yourself and have made yourself judges with evil opinions? My beloved brethren, listen, did not Elohim himself choose the poor of this world, rich in faith and heirs to the kingdom which he has promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and they not drag you into the courts, then it goes on from there. But this was a reminder that James was giving to the brethren about the very things that he was telling them. You know, because somebody rich walks into the assembly, you know, and you separate yourself. That's not what Yeshua did. He chose the poor.
Right.
He chose to help those individuals.
He chose the needy.
He chose the needy.
Yeah. Really quick. Yeah, I want to definitely make it, but go ahead, Tom.
Yes, I've come from an organization, some may recognize this, where retrospectively, after I was this fellowship, came to see what others had shown me. When you carry on here and what Curtis pointed out here in Zechariah 11, it talks about the reciprocal punishment of those that were not merciful, that did exploit the flock. And it gets down here to verse 17 of Zechariah 11. Woe to the worthless or idle shepherd that leaves the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, or authorities come against him, and upon his right, very specific, your right eye, and his arm shall be clean dried up or be weakened and infirm. His right eye shall be utterly darkened. The former shepherd general of that organization had these two things precisely happen to him before he died, astonishingly enough.
So I guess let's keep that thought of shepherd, because I mean the question could come up. Well, David, how can you think that this is a fulfillment of Psalms 23:1, where it says Yahweh is my shepherd? We know after this, Yeshua, and I couldn't find any verses before this particular account to where Yeshua started to reference himself as the good shepherd. And let's go to John 10:3, which Tom so graciously mentioned. He saw where I was going already.
For your diplomacy.
Right. So John 10:3. We're going to only read a couple of verses here. John 10:3, and here's where Yeshua and Yahweh are one, and we know this, and so therefore this does reflect Yeshua as well. John 10:3 says, "To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of a stranger." And then we're going to skip down. Tom read verse 7, but we're going to skip down to John 10, verse 11. John 10, verse 11, Yeshua says, "I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep." And then verse 14, just a little further down, he reiterates, "I am the good shepherd, and knoweth my sheep, and am known of mine." Yeshua took on the title of the Good Shepherd at that point. So his compassion for them following him, not having a shepherd, is kind of the reason why he was moved to that compassion, knowing that he would eventually become their shepherd.
I have heard over the years one Christian quote pastor after another say, when it says the thief comes to rob and kill and destroy, and they say, "You see what Satan does?" But the subject there is not primarily our adversary. He
Yeah.
influences them. It's the actual hirelings that won't do right by the sheep.
Those Pharisees
In
and
contrast
Sadducees.
to the great shepherd, Peter calls him, that's Yahshua himself.
Right. Pharisees, Lisa first, excuse me.
And it's interesting, I just looked up a question that says, do sheep recognize their shepherd's voice?
Mm-hmm.
It says the shepherd has specific calls to his sheep to stop, turn, and move forward. Over time, the sheep learn to recognize the voice of the shepherd and learn to trust him. They will not listen or obey commands from others. They listen to the one voice they can trust.
Right. Exactly. Because that's the one that has been feeding them all their life. Yes, Larry.
And also in verse 16 of John 10, it says, "And I have other sheep that are not of this fold, that I must bring those also, and shall hear my voice, and shall be one flock and one shepherd." So, if you break down Yeshua's ministry, he was gathering the 12 apostles.
Mhm.
And he had footstep followers that followed him. But remember, by the time of the outpouring of the set-apart spirit in the upper room in Acts, there were only 120. Okay, so there were just a very small nucleus group. Okay, but he prophesied here that there would be other sheep that would listen and come into the fold. And immediately thereafter, what was it, 3,000 was baptized, then another 5,000. So it exponentially began to explode.
And even more so, Paul's being sent to the Gentiles
Exactly.
that were not a part of the original fold, and the branches that will be grafted. Yeah, that will be grafted in. Yes. Dennis.
Well, to follow up in Acts 18:10, for I am with you, talking to Paul,
Mhm.
and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many people in this city.
In that city, yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert.
And how could they know about us today?
Right. And, fast forward to now, all of
Even
those
now.
that are now still following, hearing his voice and following him
Right.
as sheep, because he is the good shepherd, they couldn't conceive of how the word and the gospel, they were told how it would be spread throughout the world, but they couldn't conceive that the many different sheep that were not a part of the original fold would come to pass. That's exactly right. All right, let me get on track. Let me get back in. All right. So, great commentary. So you guys are actually, I'm happy that you kind of see where I'm coming from, and everybody, we kind of get that understanding of, although the commentary is a great source for us to understand what scripture, we don't want to solely rely on the commentary, and that's what I have to be conscious of for myself, and that's what I'm just trying to relate to you guys. But I do want us to remember Psalms 23:2, because I am going to back up my statement of Psalms 23:1 was fulfilled by Yeshua, because Psalms 23:2 says, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Remember that portion. All right, but before we get there, let's go to Matthew 14:15 now. Dennis is like, oh, I know what you're talking about now.
No, I'm just saying about, we've gotten 2 verses.
Yeah, we're the third verse. So I don't know. I'm going to get it done. I still got 30 minutes. I'm going to get it in. Matthew 14:15. Matthew 14:15 says, and when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals, food, so they can buy something to eat. Now, obviously, I got a ton of questions on this one, but the two that I really landed on was, would you say that disciples were worried about the people's welfare? They had good intentions to worry about the people's welfare at this point, right? And what they were asking was a good thing. It's getting late. Let's tell them, hey, go get you something to eat so you don't starve. If we stay here all night, there's nothing to eat here. We don't want anybody to be impacted by this. So
But it was already evening, the sun goes down, right? Is that what?
it was getting late. It was getting close. You know how it's if the sun sets at like 8 o'clock.
You got about 30.
Yeah, you probably got about an hour. It's getting late. And they could probably walk to another place 1 hour. I'm speculating, but we know when our mom says be home before the street lights come on, and we are a mile down the street. We don't wait till the lights come on before we start heading home. We get there before the lights come on. So that's the first question. I think in my mind that the disciples had good intentions in mind when they said, Yeshua, let's send the multitude away so that they can go get something to eat.
That's a good assumption.
Yes. But did they think about what Yeshua told them a few verses earlier in Matthew 6:25? Matthew 6:25. We've already covered it.
No, they've probably forgotten that.
They had probably forgotten that. But Yeshua told them, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but he says there, Matthew 6:25, therefore I say unto you, take not no thought for your life, what ye will eat or what you shall drink, not yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat? Is not the body more than raiment? Don't take any thought of the food. It's not about the food. The more important thing is about the message that he was given to them. And so I think about this because sometimes we have good intentions for everyone when we state that this person should do this person should do that. We have good intentions in mind for them. But in actuality, is that what's best for them? Is that what we should be trying to do for them? The caring for the people was a good thing in my mind, in this particular verse. But what should they have said to Yeshua in this? And again, I'm Monday morning quarterbacking here. I got scripture I can study. I can figure out and formulate what exactly we should do in this situation. Being there, present in the moment, I probably would have did the same thing. Hey, send the people away. But if we based on scripture and what Yeshua had formally told them about food, I think the more appropriate response would have been, Master, it's getting late. How must we care for the people so that they can continue to hear your word and be healed? Not sending them away, but keeping them there and allowing Yahweh to provide. Dennis.
Well, it also, in the next verses, talk about they had brought for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they were also worried that, well, we don't have enough here to share with
everybody.
Right.
We don't even have barely got enough for us.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's what's stated right here in Mark 8.
Hold that thought, because we're getting there. We're taking it one verse by verse.
Slow down, Tom.
Yeah, we're going to get there. Yeah, but I want to set the stage before we get there.
Sure.
Because the stage here is not choosing for others how Yeshua or Yahweh is supposed to bless them, especially if you're taking them away from the word so that they can do something. You would want to put the word first. And I'm really quick before Johan's, Matthew 6:33, it just follows up what I just mentioned of don't worry about food or your life. It says, but seek ye first the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Take therefore no thought in the morrow, or for the morrow shall take no thought, for the things in itself suffices is the day of the evil thereof. If we think about that statement, the scripture, in this particular situation, the disciples should have more thought about the food that was the word, the teaching that was being given, as opposed to the food that sustains the body, in my opinion. Yes.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going, so I'm gonna let everyone marinate on what you keep saying about moving away from Yahshua and the Word.
Yes.
But to answer your question, my answer to that was say nothing. Because
Let
they
him.
should have trusted Yahshua that he knows the needs of the people that were there. And he knew what they were gonna need and how he was gonna provide it. But sometimes it's that flesh, we're like, maybe he's not aware.
Yeah, maybe he's not looking. Maybe he's not aware of what's going on. Let me step up
Right.
and say, I'm paying attention, Yeshua. It's getting late. Let's send the people away. Like I said, instead of how can we figure out a way to keep them here, but also provide your teaching and your healing? Obviously, you can provide food. Why was that not a thought for the disciples? And you're right, this might be because
They probably weren't quite there. They weren't ready at that level yet.
I would say the same.
I would say the same. But wait till we get
They
to the
were
next.
still learning themselves.
Yeah, wait till we get to the next thing. This is where I was like, I don't know if I can make excuses for him at this point, but I'll get there. Hold on. Clark's notes, just a thought here, says that he that seeketh the kingdom first is surely to inherit all the temporal necessities. once you seek the kingdom first, Yahweh will provide everything else after that. And that's something we have to really keep in our mind. Long as we put him first, everything else we need will be provided. And there's a scripture for that. Yes, Robert.
Indeed, God will provide, but sometimes we look at what we want versus what Yahweh gives, what he provides.
Mhm.
You know, Yahweh knows what we need, and he will give us what we need, but sometimes we judge it by what we want.
Mhm.
And in this instance, you know, perhaps the disciples themselves were hungry and wanted
Yeah.
to eat, and they said, okay, the people, let's send them away so they can eat. So, you know, and because they only had the 5 loaves, the 5
5
fishes
loaves,
to eat.
like, let's
So-
get them out of here so we can eat and nobody
so
can
we
ask us
eat.
for something.
Yeah, so perhaps
Like
they
this is
themselves were
saying.
hungry and saying, oh, you know, it's getting late, and maybe the people are hungry and they should go, you know, so.
Yeah. So my final thought on this one, we're going to move to the next verse. The disciples were choosing for the people the temporal over the spiritual
Right.
at this point by saying put them away. Making them leave to go get food would have stopped them from hearing the word of Yahshua and being healed, which is something we should not do. Interrupt somebody else's blessings. Got to keep that in mind.
That makes me think about Mary, and Martha's coming in and saying, oh, what's going on in the kitchen?
Mhm.
Martha, Martha, you're concerned with many things.
Yeah.
Mary has kept the best part.
Mhm.
You get
Right.
fed, but she's here with me.
Right. Don't prevent her. Yes, Larry.
For 3.5 years while Yeshua went about his ministry and traveled all over, we never read in the scriptures one single time where he literally stopped and did work to create money to be able to do it.
Right.
Now, he may have saved up all the, 30 some odd years of money and stuff before he ever did this. And the scriptures never say that. The point is he always relied on the Father
Always.
to provide.
Yep.
He talked about the birds of heaven, that he would provide that. I went out the other day preparing on my water hose, and there was a little bitty lizard about that big on my water hose. I looked at that little guy and I says, well, he doesn't have a mama, but there's nothing that's preventing him from finding food and eating.
Yeah.
I really thought about
Finding
that.
water.
And so the old saying, sometimes the best way to unplug somebody's ears is put something in their mouth.
Nah.
And there are some organizations that they're going to teach them about the Bible and things like that. And especially if it's a group of people that are destitute, so to speak, they feed them.
Right. And hey, in this situation, in my mind, like I said earlier, Chris, I would probably try to say, okay, I am not going to blame them. The disciples didn't know any better. They didn't know the possibilities. So let's read verse 16, and then we're going to go into that. Matthew 14:16. How many verses are we in now? 4? But Yeshua said unto them, they need not depart. Give ye them to eat. And then I'll go ahead and read 17. And they say unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Just like Dennis mentioned earlier. They don't have enough to feed everyone. And here's where my excuses for them kind of fall to the wayside. Let's turn to 2 Kings 4, verse 42. 2 Kings 4, verse 42. And again, I did not know this verse before I did this study, so I still kind of say disciples may not have known this, or it might have not come to their memory in this certain situation, but it is our responsibility to know this, and it's our responsibility to bring, remember this so the set apart spirit can bring it to our remembrance if we are ever in this situation. 2 Kings 4, verse 42. And this is Elijah is here. And I'm not going to read the whole thing in the interest of time, but just wanted to focus on this particular interaction. 2 Kings 4, 42. And there came a man from Baal-shalishah, and brought the man of Elohim bread of the first fruits. Now this is Elijah that he's talking about. So some man from Baal-shalishah, I'm not going to get that right, brought Elijah bread of the first fruits. He brought him 12 loaves of barley and full ears of corn and the husk thereof. And he said, this is Elijah saying to the man, given to the people that they may eat. And his servitor, the man from Shalisha, said, what, should I set this before 100 men? He said again, give the people that they may eat. For thus saith Yahweh, they shall eat and shall therefore and leave their and shall leave thereof. And I'll read that again. For thus saith Yahweh, they shall eat and shall leave thereof.
Leftovers.
Leftovers, yes. And it is assumed by commentary that the leftovers was exactly what he set down before them. Whatever you put there, what will be left is the same thing thereof. And verse 44 says, so he set it before them, and they did eat, and left thereof according to the word of Yahweh. A multitude being fed with a little. There's precedence in exactly what was about to happen in the feeding of the 5,000 from Yahshua. Yes, Lisa.
Going back to the Israelites and how Yahweh provided them for 40 years
Yes.
with food.
And with manna in the
Yeah.
wilderness.
Yeah.
Even more of a precedence of Yahweh will provide. And so that, go
I
ahead.
had a friend that was with his Vineyard Christian Fellowship in McKinney, Texas years ago. And he and his wife had been down in Mexico because they had found out that there was a village there with some people that were just out of food, essentially starving. And they got all these bags of flour, took it down, it was on a pallet, on a real hot day. And his wife was tugging on his shirt and saying, hey, look, these people are here, they're going down the street and around the corner of the block. He said, well, just keep doing what we're called to do. He said, brother, I don't want to in any way add or take away from the word what the scripture says. After the people had come and gone, we looked down, and the same amount of flour on that pallet as when we began.
Mm-hmm.
He said, we got to stop believing that that was for back then in the good old Bible days, and it's not for now, because it is for now as well.
For those that do believe. And that's the portion of it right there. It will happen if you believe it will. But if you have no, frame of reference of the possibilities and how Yahshua and Yahweh can provide to you, how can it happen for you? Not saying a miracle can't happen for you if you don't know what's about to happen, but how much more if you know and believe and could follow the script that Yahshua has given us. So that's why I say I'm kind of on the fence to where, do we blame the disciples for trying to send the people away, or do we not blame them? There is context to say that, hey, in the past, Yahweh has done a thing many times, even with the, who was the lady that was sharing her food with the prophet, and then,
The last meal and the sun and the oil.
yeah, the oil.
That's 1 Kings 17.
Oh, who, I can't remember which prophet it was. Was it Elijah?
Elijah.
Elijah?
Woman's unnamed, but
Yeah, and so
The place of burning Zarephath.
countless times we know that just because there's a little bit doesn't mean that it cannot feel a lot. Yes, Curtis.
actually, as we read the book of Matthew, all the way, and the Gospels, the rest of the Gospels all the way through, and we take it up into Acts, they seem to have a pattern of being forgetful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is a possible explanation we can accept.
Right.
Because
As soon as he said it, they forget it because they get chastised again for not
we got to remember,
understanding.
they asked, okay, what's the sign of the end of the age? Okay, they see him come back, and then Acts 1. Okay, good. Now you're going to set the kingdom, right? No.
What did I just say?
What did I tell you the last time I saw you?
Right. Robert.
Yeah, in this account, I don't really blame them because I think they did have a concern for the people. But
Yes.
It's the lesson, because Joshua always used these things to teach something.
Yes.
And this was a lesson for them to what do you value,
Yes.
more. So that you brought up about Martha and her sister yeah, it's always a lesson that Joshua uses that moment to teach us a certain lesson of value.
Matter of fact, let's go into the lesson. It's definitely just coming up next. So glad we're on the same track. So let's turn to John 6:5. John 6, verse 5. So if there's a lesson here, what's that lesson? Now, John gives a slightly different account than Matthew for what just happened when he says, give them to eat, and they turn around and says, but we only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Or better yet, even more so, the whole 2-3 scriptures here where they said, send away the multitude. John gives a different account, and most people will say, oh, it's a contradiction in scripture. John says one thing and then Matthew says another. That means the scripture doesn't align. No. Let's read what John says, because John actually he's depicting the message. He's showing what the message is behind this. And John 6, verse 5 says, when Yeshua then lifted up his eyes and saw the great company coming unto him, he saith unto Philip, whence shall we... I'll start over. John 6, verse 5, when Yeshua then lifted up his eyes and saw the great company coming unto him, he saith unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? And this he said to prove him. This is the lesson. For he himself knew what he would do. He already knew what was going to happen. The ideal answer here would have been, for Philip, obviously, with Elohim, all things are possible, right? But I'm not going to fault John for not having Philip for not having an answer. Philip answered to him and said, 200 pennyfolds of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. Meaning we needed a whole lot more to feed these people. So 2 things, First, let's talk about Robert and the lesson that we should learn in regard of the feeding of the 5,000, that all things are possible through Yahweh and Yeshua. But it is not a contradiction here, because we can take both of the accounts. In reading up to this point, we would take all the Gospels, figure out what all of them say, and then we get the picture of a thing. So if we take Matthew and John, just Matthew and John, we figure out that the disciples came to him and said, it's getting late. Send the people away so that they can get food. Then he lifted up his eyes and saw all of the people. And then he turned to Philip and had a private conversation that only John heard in regards to how should we feed all these people, to test Philip to see if Philip knew the answer. Yahweh will provide. It's still, both of those things could happen in that order, instead of saying Matthew is only right or John is only right of the accounts that happen here. Sounds about right, right? People that say there are contradictions in scriptures are looking for those contradictions because they don't want to believe scripture. But people that believe will take them at face value and always find the truth in scripture. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, and very scripture you read there in 2 Kings 4:42 could be one of those examples, because in the version that you read, it said the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and full of ears of corn. Corn was not introduced to the old world until the 15th century. Okay, so that, it wasn't really talking about corn. In fact, the King James Bible in 1611 used the word corn, which it had only been introduced more than a century, because it came from the New World.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read like another version, it says it says the first fruits 20 loaves of barley and full ears of grain.
Right.
So it wasn't actually corn like we have today. It was grain. No way.
Right. So all in understanding what scripture is trying to relate to us.
A little bit of research,
Yeah. Digging deeper.
And that root word used in Strong's, well, it does say plant vineyards and different types of plants and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it also could say, you could use a modern term as corn.
Right. All right. So thinking about that, Yeshua already knew what he was going to do. He was familiar with 2 Kings. He was familiar with Elijah feeding the 100. But we're talking greater numbers than 100 men, right? We're talking 5,000 men besides women and children. But he already knew what he was going to do. And so now we get into back to the how, David, how do you feel that Psalms, where did it go? There it is. Psalms 23 was being fulfilled in this moment. Let's read Matthew 14:18 now. And we are going to get through this. Matthew 14, verse 18. That's where we're talking about, let's just get context here. They told him to send a multitude away. He said that they should not depart, give them something to eat. They said that they only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And then we pick up where he says in Matthew 14:18, he said, bring them hither to me. Already knowing what he was going to do. Matthew 14:19 says, and he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. I'll read that again. He commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. Now, I'm really going to hit this one home because I want to read Mark and John's account of this same verse. Mark 6:39. Turn there if you want to. Mark 6, verse 39 adds a little more to it. Man, remember, we're putting pieces together. Mark 6, verse 39. Mark 6:39 says, and he commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass. So we're not just talking grass, we're talking green grass. Because if we were just talking grass, I don't know about you guys' lawn right now in Texas, but my lawn is brown. And if you're talking about a desert place, your mind immediately thinks brown. But Mark clarifies the grass is green. And then what does John add to the conversation? John 6, verse 10.
John said what?
6, verse 10. John 6, verse 10. John 6, verse 10 says, and Yahshua said, make the man to sit down. Now there was much grass in the place in which they were sitting. There was much grass in this place. So we got 3 accounts. Told him to sit down in the grass, sitting down in green grass, and obviously there was much grass because we're talking 5,000 men, besides women and children. So David, why are you mentioning this? In my mind, I had never before thought or was solidified enough that Psalms 23:1 was prophetic, more so than now. Because we talked about Yeshua being the shepherd, but let's read it again. Psalms 23:1. Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. That's why he was so compassionate about the people coming to him. And he was compassionate because they were sheep without a shepherd. And he is the shepherd, and he told them to now lie down or sit down in green pastures. So
The
that
shepherd's not going to lead you to a desert full of sand.
no, and have you sitting in sand burning. Green pastures. Yes, Wendy. Sorry.
Living water.
I'm going there next. So that is.
Green grass comes from green water.
Yeah, so just to finish it up, and lead me besides the still waters. And where do we see that? That is future. That is to come. You don't have to turn there. Revelation 7:17. Revelation 7:17 says, shall lead them, the Lamb shall feed them and lead them unto living fountains of water. So we have Psalms 23 as prophetic, happening then and happening in the future of what Yahshua will do for his people. Yes, Wendy?
And when he was crucified and he was stabbed in,
It's credible to me, it's believable.
in his side, and water, blood and water flowed.
Yes, out of him when they pierced his side. Yes.
Also in Revelation 8:7, in the end times, all the green grass was burned up.
All the
Yes.
green grass, nowhere to lie anymore. All the green grass will be burned up. And so, yes, he maketh me to lie down in green pasture. This is specifically talking about Yahshua. Yahweh is my shepherd. I shall not want. I found that fascinating. That's why I'm going so much on that one. That just hit home for me, and I was like, man, Scripture is just awesome. Yes, Curtis.
The first 3 verses of Isaiah 12.
First 3 verses of Isaiah 12. Go for it.
Oh Yahweh, I will praise you, though you were angry with me, and your anger is turned away from me, and you comfort me. Behold, Yahweh is my salvation, and I will not be afraid. For Yahweh is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. Therefore, with joy will you draw water from the wells of salvation.
Mm-hmm. Yahweh is our salvation. Yes.
Are you about to leave from this verse?
Hold on. No, I'm gonna finish this verse. Yeah.
Okay, wait,
Yeah, I'm
I
gonna
don't wanna
finish
get ahead of you. Go
it.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna finish it. All right. So I was on Matthew 14:19. I'm gonna finish it up because I stopped where he told them to lie down in green pasture, and to sit down on the grass. I want to hit home how that connects to Psalms, but let's finish it off. And I'll start from the beginning. Matthew 14:19. And he commanded the multitudes to sit down in the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up into heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And I'll kind of stop there. Were you gonna make a comment before I get?
Yeah, I'm surprised you got as far as you did. This whole account is very, it's wonderful. And it's the only, other than the resurrection, when you look at the miracles or things done in relation to Yeshua, other than the resurrection, this is the only one that's in all 4 of the accounts.
Right.
And all 4,
Mm-hmm.
with the 5,000. 4,000 is only mentioned in 2.
Right.
But the point I want to mention, and the significance of all this, there's a couple of things. When you said he brought them out, like he went out of the place,
Mhm.
and then he went to this hill where the people came out. They weren't in the towns.
Right.
So, Ezekiel 34, remember Ezekiel 34, this is when Yahweh says, I'm against the shepherds. Here he sent Ezekiel, he said, now you go tell them, pretty much, I'm done, y'all are fired, I'm done with you. I will get my shepherd. And what did Yahweh say? Yahweh said, I. And in verse 10, I'm sorry, well, you can start in verse 10, but I'm going to pick it up in 13, verse 11. He says, for so says so I was Yahweh, behold, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. And as the shepherd seeks his flock in the day, that is among the scattered sheep, so I will bring out my sheep. So he did. He brought them out. And I will deliver them from the places where they've been scattered in the day of thick cloud. And I will bring them out, once again, from the peoples, and gather them from the hands, and I will bring them to their land. And I will feed them on the mountains, because remember he brought them up to this place of Israel, by the ravines and all the dwelling places of the land. And I will feed them in a good pasture, once again, and on the high mountains of Israel, their fold shall be, and they shall lie there in a good fold. And that's, once again, those green pastures, and they shall feed in fat pasture in all the mountains of Israel.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of a lot of people will say, hey, no, that's futuristic. That's a prophecy to come. But Yeshua fulfilled it then, and he will fulfill it again. Just because it's mentioned as a prophecy doesn't mean it will only happen once. It will happen multiple times. Dennis and then Larry. Oh, okay, Larry.
Yeah, one thing to consider in this verse that you just read, Yeshua took these fishes and loaves. He prayed to the Father, to Yahweh. He broke them, and he distributed among his 12 disciples. It was the 12 disciples that went out among the 5,000, and every time they pulled out a loaf, there was another loaf behind it. Every time they pulled out a fish, there was a fish behind it. They seen the operation of Yahweh's set-apart spirit right there. So, symbolically, Yeshua was blessing, providing, gave it to his apostles. The apostles provided the food.
Right.
It was setting the pattern going forward after Yeshua.
How his church will operate. Yep, exactly. That is definitely the mold of how we should continue on spreading his words, receiving it, and relying on the master first, Yahweh, Yeshua's word, to guide us on how we share that and disseminate that word to others, to bring them into the fold so that they may be fed. and they may receive the blessing. That is exactly right. So in the interest of time, I mentioned here, I'm not going to go through it. There are some that correlate this act of him taking 5 loaves, blessing it, and breaking bread as the Last Supper was done in the same manner. And so this was a precursor to the Last Supper. The only thing with that is, and it, Luke 22:19, it happens the same exact way. Luke 22:19 says, and he took bread and gave thanks and brake it, right? Same account, same thing. But if we say that, that means, well, I'll read what Barnes Note says. The breaking of a piece of bread was a common act between Judeans. It was broken, not cut like we do today, to say, and if you're going to, you wouldn't eat an entire loaf of bread back then. We do that now. When I get some naan, I eat the whole thing. But back then, you would break it and share it. So to say that this is equal to the Last Supper, you would have to say that every time they ate, it was equal to the Last Supper because they broke bread. So just wanted to mention that a lot of people say that. I don't know. That's where we're commentary. We have to take it with a grain of salt. All right. 2 more verses. We're going to get this in. Matthew 14:20. Matthew 14, verse 20. Matthew 14:20 says, and they did all eat and were filled, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. Now, most read Matthew, Luke, and John's account of the taking up and notice that they did not specify how many fish were taken up because it only says the bread or the baskets. And we, basically associate 12 baskets with baskets of bread. But, when we go to Mark, Mark actually clarifies this. And that's where I say we have to take all the gospel to figure out what's happening. So if somebody says that they did not mention fish and how much it was taken up, let's go to Mark. Mark 6:43. Mark 6:43. Mark 6:43 says, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments and of the fish. Now we got a better picture. Mark is the one that has the more descriptive, and he accounts for the bread and the fish in 12 baskets. Now the question is, is it 12 baskets of bread and 12 baskets of fish? I think so, in my opinion. Or it's a total of 12 baskets with bread and fish. Don't know, really doesn't matter. They had leftovers. That's the most important part. Now, another thing to mention is in John 6, verse 12. John 6, verse 12. John 6, verse 12, and we should be able to get through this last verse really quick. John 6:12 says, when they were filled, he said unto the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. And so now the question is, why did he make sure that nothing was lost? Now there's a whole lot of opinions about why nothing should be lost. The most common one that I saw when I was researching was based on a quote that I could not verify. And the quote says, and maybe you guys have heard it, great will be the punishment of those who waste the crumbs of food, scattered seeds, and neglect the law. Have you guys ever heard of that? That's associated with John 6:12, but nobody knows who said it, and it's not in Scripture. And so there's been a doctrine built around don't waste Yahweh's food, or don't waste the crumbs of food, or don't neglect what Yahweh's given to you, but that's not scriptural. Yes, Wendy.
I'm thinking of the lost sheep, cause there's hold on. So there's no this scattering. There's no. It's all.
Well, in this quote it says scattered seed.
Right.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, like don't leave the leftovers. Like discard that blessing. Don't just leave it. Like the one lost sheep. Don't just forget about it because it's just one out of 99. So don't just
yeah.
forget, oh well, it's just one lost won't hurt us. But it's more of a
I think that's a different concept. He won't lose one. This is more of that Yahweh has provided must be taken up and not wasted. Yes, don't take it for granted. Grandma, yeah.
Could it be also that once he has blessed it, that is special food?
That is special food. It's not to be wasted.
And you don't give it to the dogs and you don't throw it away.
Don't throw it away and don't throw it to the dogs. That could be as simple as that. I couldn't find any more on this except for that verse. I mean, that quote, that's not a verse. But yeah, that's something else we could probably dig into a little deeper. Larry.
So, and it could be just as simple that they gathered up the fragments because it was still good food.
Yeah.
And maybe as the 5,000 men plus their wives plus their children, as they begin to leave, if they decided they wanted to take some with them, they could. That's what's going to happen here at Sabbath services. You know, at some point today, you know, many of the sisters have blessed us with great food. We're going to partake of it. At the end of the day, they throw nothing away. They gather it up, and those who want it and need it, they provide it to them.
Everybody has to have breakfast. So breakfast was in a little bit, and so they had some left over. Yes, Tom.
Keep teasing your dear wife as well, because there's often times when I tell her, what you trying to do is glean the corners of the field, because she'll hardly let me get out of here without giving me
Leftovers, yeah. No, it's because nothing should be lost. Yes.
There was also a custom of leaving something for those who served.
That is, yeah. Let's go there. Clark's notes. As a matter of fact, you don't have to turn there. I found that in Clark's notes, it says, among the Judeans, there was a custom that the residue after a meal was the property of the meal's host, those that served the actual meal. And so they would gather that up as a custom. I just find it fascinating that Yeshua specifically told them to not leave anything, to gather up everything, but I couldn't find enough information as to why. So if somebody else can figure that one out, let me know. All right, we got to go. Last verse, Matthew 14:21, before he walks on water, and that's going to be the next person's subject. Matthew 14:21 says, and they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And the only thing I wrote down here, if we're talking 5,000 men besides women and children, we could potentially talk about 10,000 people, easy.
With children, 15.
Yeah, and if we're conservative about it, 5,000 men, let's just say half of them were married. So you got 2,500 women. And let's just say half of them had 2 kids. Then you're talking 2,500 kids. That's 10,000 conservatively. Yes, Curtis.
I'm content with the explanation of the custom. What was left was belonged to those who served.
Mm-hmm.
How much did they pick up? 12 baskets, 12 disciples. Each one got their own
There
basket.
you go. The custom of the
Joshua said,
servers.
I got food you don't know about.
Yeah, the servers actually picked up what was left, and it was enough for them who served.
Yeah, Curtis beat me to it because you remember Joshua said that he who would be the greatest must be the least, and you know, he who would be first must be last. So, and the disciples served the people and they ate first.
Right.
And remember, they were only concerned, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And now, after they've done their job in serving, now they come back with 12 baskets.
And they sit down and eat.
And more than, yeah, they came back with more than they started with. And
Yeah.
each one of them had more than that they could individually consume.
That is exactly better than what I could probably think of. That is exactly what happened. All right, so we're talking 10,000 people got served with 5 loaves, 2 fishes. That is a miraculous feat, which anything's possible through Yahweh, in my opinion. And that should be our first perspective of this. All right, we got to go. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
David,
I'll say this last thing of that food that they brought. They didn't bring it because when you read it,
They
now,
got it
it
from a
says
little
somebody
boy.
else
Yeah,
provided, some little boy had it.
And they got it from a little boy.
It wasn't even them providing. So once again, showing Yahweh's greatness, and they provided.
Exactly. Sent the little boy with food so that they can actually eat.
yeah, David, the 5 loaves could also represent the 5 Torah, Right, the books.
5 books of the law.
Yeah, and the 2 fish could be the 2 greatest commandments.
The 2 greatest commandments. Love Yahweh, love your neighbor. Exactly. There's connections everywhere we go. That's why I love Scripture. All right, we'll be back at 3 o'clock with the main message from Dennis.